to start with, which is I love Wuthering Heights. Sorry. And I slightly love Kate, actually.
Oh, hooray. Obviously. Even better.
That was rhetorically quite clever, I think. So I'm going to try, in my little slot, to say things about Jane Austen, and I'm in favour of her novels and not against Wuthering Heights, although we might be drawn into fisticuffs later and there's sort of question and answer. But I'll try and remain chaste for now and think positive. And I'm going off piste already because I couldn't resist from what Erica said. She said the polite or the genteel versus the wild. And actually, and everybody laughed as if they recognised what those two were. Of course, the wild's Emily Bronte, isn't it? But wild occurs in my favourite sentence in Pride and Prejudice. And as I actually know this sentence, and the word wild has been used, I will give it to you as an example of what I hope will be demonstrated in our first reading, which is that there's plenty of emotional stuff going on in Jane Austen, if you're ingenious enough to realise it. And
that's shameful.
My favourite sentence is about Lydia. Oh. Don't you love her? I mean, you know how it is in life. People like Lydia, or Mrs. Bennet, or Mrs. Elton, or Mrs. Norris, they are ghastly. Being with them would be hell. But in Jane Austen's novels, you cheer every time they come into the room, don't you? And whenever Lydia comes in, aren't you delighted? And there's a wonderful bit near the end of Pride and Prejudice where Lydia, who has disgraced herself, who has risked her reputation, has risked everything, she has been off for a month and a half with a practiced rake, unmarried. She is a month past her 16th birthday, okay? Those of you who feel liberal about this, about Lydia, and who are perhaps parents of daughters, think about this. A month past her 16th birthday, she has been living with this man for a month and a half, and he is, Wickham, blackmailed, bribed, call it what you will, into marrying her. He's paid to marry her. And they come back to Longbourn, and Elizabeth and Jane are waiting to see what she's going to be like. And we're seeing it all through Elizabeth's eyes. And there's a wonderful sentence among many other wonderful sentences, because one of the things about Jane Austen is her sentences are wonderful. Yes. I can't prove this, but almost every Jane Austen sentence just has her DNA in and couldn't have been written by anybody else. But there's a wonderful sentence. You're looking at Lydia. She comes back and it says, Lydia was Lydia still. Easy, isn't it? You could all write that. You can do that in creative writing, surely. Yes. Lydia is genius. But then it goes on. Lydia was Lydia still. Untamed, unabashed, wild, noisy, and fearless. It's poetry. Yes. It's fantastic. Wild she is, and that's why we all find her so interesting. There's lots of wildness in Jane Austen's novels. And it throbs often beneath the surface. And we're about to hear a passage, I think, where it's going to, a different kind of wildness throbs beneath the surface. But I also wanted to pick up on the piano. Okay. Well, I'm sorry, I've got a script, I could do that, but, you know, the piano, I can't resist it, the piano. Virginia Woolf, there are lots of great writers have not got Jane Austen, especially men, but not just men. Virginia Woolf, a genius herself, got Jane Austen. She knew that she was the greatest novelist in the English language. And she said, of that greatness, she said something I think really true. She said, of all great writers, she is the hardest, the most difficult to catch in the act of greatness. Yeah? I think that's a profound thought. And that's why it's very easy to think, oh, nothing much to it. It's why it is that, as I heard a great Jane Austen expert say recently on the radio, well, the thing is, it's very, very simple, and it's very, very complicated. And you know that thing about Jane Austen, which perhaps she shares in a funny sort of way with Wuthering Heights, that an intelligent 13-year-old can read Pride and Prejudice and totally get it. Especially if it's a girl. Boys have to wait a bit longer, in my case, to the age of about 26. But they totally, a 13-year-old who likes books will totally get it. And then a 50-something prof who has read it 15 times before will pick it up to read it again because of a seminar he's got to give the next week. And within about a page will think, God, that's brilliant. I never saw that before. And those of you here, I don't know if there are some of you here like this, who regularly read Jane Austen will know that experience. That every time you read it, you thought you knew it, but you don't. It's so simple, but it's so complicated. And the piano thing, you can pick up anything in Jane Austen, any thread, and you know that when you think about the piano, which Kate was a little bit satirical about, that actually, the piano that matters, the pianos that matter so much everywhere, that nothing is accidental or incidental or not part of this beautiful design. Her books are like wonderful, tiny, minute, almost wickedly ingenious Swiss watches. And as soon as you start thinking about pianos, if you know and love Jane Austen, there's no chapter about pianos in my book. I was thinking, but there should have been. Why isn't there a chapter about pianos? Think about Anne Elliot, whom we're about to hear. Think about her in Persuasion. Condemned by her brilliance and talent and the fact that she's 28 and her bloom has gone, to play the piano while the man she still loves flounces around with these two fluffy girls. Yes? She has to play for them. And the piano is a kind of part of her sort of fate. My, how your fingers fly up and down, says Mrs. Musgrove. The piano in Emma, of course, which is the sort of weird love gift that Frank Churchill has given to Jane Fairfax, and that foolish Emma thinks has come from somebody else. Pianos always mean a hell of a lot in Jane Austen. Everything means a hell of a lot in Jane Austen. We're going to go to the first reading now. Now, I'll just say quickly what it is and why I've chosen it. Eleanor's going to do most of it. It's from Persuasion, and it's in Persuasion, as some of you will know, Anne Elliot, who's 28 and lost her bloom, has 8 years before the novel begins been persuaded by her friend and mother substitute, her own mother being dead, her friend and mother substitute, Lady Russell, to turn down the proposal of marriage from Captain Frederick Wentworth, even though she loves him and he loves her. And she's persuaded to do this because she's convinced not only that it would be foolish for her to rush into it, but that actually it would be bad for him, for his career, which is at that moment non-existent in the Navy. And he is sorely offended and goes off. But then he comes back. 8 years later, Anne is staying with her sister Mary and Mary's husband, her brother-in-law Charles, and Captain Wentworth is visiting, and he's at the Musgroves' house. And she knows that he's there, and she hears that he's going to come down, he's going out shooting with Charles and Henrietta and Louisa, the fluffy girls, and he's coming down, and she's about to see him, and it's been 8 years, and I chose this because, well, I'll tell you afterwards.
Mary, very much gratified